urging them to do that as quickly as possible. And with that, Madam President, I would ask a unanimous consent that the remaining time on the Democratic control be allocated as follows: Senator Boxer for 15 minutes, Senator Casey for 10 minutes, and Senator Schumer for 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Without objection, thank you, Madam President, and I would yield the floor.
Madam President. Senator from California.
Thank you very much. I think we're trying to make the case here today that there's a very easy way for us to climb down from this fiscal cliff, because the Senate already passed a bill that would extend tax cuts to 98% of the American people, and the House will not take it up. This will mean over 10 years about $1 trillion in savings. And it won't hurt the millionaires and billionaires. They've told us that over and over again. So here's when the Senate passed the middle-class tax cuts, Madam President. July 25th, 2012. The Republicans have been sitting on it over in the House. They didn't do anything in July, August, September, October, November, and December. Here we are 6 months later, and they refuse to allow a vote on this for reasons that go to their internal disputes. It is time for them to put country over party. It is time for them to put country over their ideological battles. That was a mouthful. I'm going to try it again. It is time for them to put country over their ideological battles. It is time for them to make a decision that favors the American people. Now, I served in the House for 10 proud years, Madam President. It was wonderful, fascinating, interesting. And I served there when Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House. And Tip O'Neill understood the magic of 218. What do I mean by that? The magic of 218 was finding 218 votes to get something done. And Tip didn't care if he got it from a liberal, from a conservative, from a moderate, from an independent, from a wacko, it didn't matter. He didn't care who you were, what you were, if he thought you were great or bright or not. He had to put together 218 for the good of the country. And he did it when Ronald Reagan was president. He did it when there was a president who had different views from his own. And they worked together for the good of the country. And I look over at the House and I don't know what I see. There's a few brave voices there speaking out and saying, let's do this thing. Let's extend the middle-class tax cuts. But let me tell you, we have 27 days left to do this before people start facing higher taxes. On average, $2,200 a family. And that's a lot of money for a middle-class family. Now, I want to just be completely honest here and bring up an issue, which is that I never voted for the Bush-era tax cuts. I was one of the few, minority, because I worried that it would destroy our fiscal responsibility. And I hate to say it now, I was right. I was right. There were surpluses that Bill Clinton left us, but because George W. Bush went in front of the microphone, he said, I have political capital and I'm going to cut everybody's taxes. He then put 2 wars on the credit card, and that was the end of the surpluses. We went into deficits as far as the eye could see, deeper and deeper in debt. So you might ask then, Senator Boxer, why are you now supporting those tax cuts being renewed for 98% of the people? And the answer is, it's a different time and a different place. We're getting out of a recession, and we can make up the monies we need to balance this budget by going just to the top rate, going to the people over $250,000. Remember, this plan that we passed in July, we'll go back to that chart, that gives a tax break on the first $250,000 of income. And in essence, giving everybody a tax break on that first $250,000. It's only after that that the taxes go back to Clinton era. And because this is a different time and place, I support giving a tax break, continuing it for 98%, but asking the wealthiest to pay their fair share for the greatest country on the face of this earth. My father was born into dire poverty. He was the only one of 9 children born in America. He was the only one of 9 children to go to college at night in your great state, Madam President, City College at night, while he supported a family by day. He became a CPA, and after he got his bachelor's, he went at night to a place called Brooklyn Law School, where he got his law degree in 5 years. I was about 10. This is America. He was able to do that. And when he was a CPA, he would oversee everybody's taxes in the family, and I was a kid, and I got my first job working for a long time. I was a telephone operator for Hilton Hotels one summer. I'll never forget it. I was not good at it. I kept putting those wires into the wrong places, but I managed to get through. And when I got my first paycheck, I went to my dad, because I was earning minimum wage. I think it was 75 cents an hour. So I don't know. I know I'm dating myself here, but it's okay. And I said, Dad, why is it I have to pay a whole bunch of money somewhere else to the government? And he said, well, when we earn money, we pay taxes, and if at the end of the year we pay too much, we get a refund. But he said, honey, I want to tell you something. You are so fortunate and blessed to be a citizen of the United States of America. And he said, I know people will laugh at you when you say this, but he said, people who live here and who work here and have the privilege of that freedom and the privilege to grab the dream, they should kiss the ground of this country every time they pay taxes. Now, I once said that on the campaign trail, and I got booed. He said, she's telling us to kiss the ground of America when we pay taxes. That was how my father felt. Now, clearly, he also believed in a progressive tax system. He was a smart man, and he believed that those at the bottom end shouldn't pay anything at all, and as you go up, you pay a little more. And that's what President Obama ran on. We had a huge election for the Senate, where the Democrats picked up seats, for the presidency, where a race that was supposed to be Governor Romney's, according to his people, was President Obama's, mainly because President Obama stood up for the middle class and said, when it comes to taxes, we all have to pay our fair share. No more, no less. So when you tell your friends that the president wants to give you your tax cut, you should tell them also it's being held up by the Republicans in Congress, who are sitting on a bill that passed July 25th, 2012. 98% of the American people will get their tax break continued. And only income over $250,000 will be taxed at the same rates when Bill Clinton was president. Let's take a look back at those days. Were they harsh for people? No. We had more millionaires created, I remember, in those days than we had in generations. You know why? Because when the middle class is strong, and he invested in the middle class, he invested in our people. They get good jobs, they pay enough taxes, they go to the mall, they take a trip across the country to see all the great landmarks, and people across this country who have businesses do well. That's why we see so many business people, including small business people, standing at President Obama's side saying, it's good for business to give the middle class their tax breaks. What are these Republicans thinking over there? If I told you, if we're having an argument, that I'll give you 98% of what you want, and you walk away from me, I say you're unreasonable. Who gets 98% of what they want? No one in an argument. We usually meet each other halfway, 50-50. We are giving the Republicans 98% of what they want on the tax cuts, but they are holding the 98% hostage for their friends, the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, the billionaires. You know, that's wrong. And we had an election about it. This is a country of, by, and for the people, not of, by, and for the billionaires. And I'm going to say to my Republican friends, and they are my friends, I've served with them for a long time, I work with them, what are you thinking? What are you doing? Let me tell you one of the things they offered in their package. This is outrageous. They want to raise the age of Medicare by 2 years. I cannot tell you, Madam President, how many people come up to me and shock me when I heard it. I am praying for my 65th birthday so I can get on Medicare because I have no insurance. There's a huge number of people uninsured between the ages of 55 and 65. So this is the Christmas present. This is the happy holiday gift from Speaker Boehner. He is not only in his package, his tax package, giving the tax break to the wealthiest, he's even cutting their taxes further, but paying for it by raising the Medicare age. Now, what does that do? It will surprise you just how bad it is. When you raise the age of Medicare from 65 to 67, ipso facto, 300,000 senior citizens would go uninsured. Merry Christmas to all. It would increase the cost to businesses by $4.5 billion because they have to keep people on their plans. Merry Christmas to you too, business people. It will increase the out-of-pocket costs for those between 65 and 66 by $3.7 billion. It would increase costs to the states by $700 million, and millions would pay an average of $2,200 more for their health care. I will use every tool at my disposal to prevent the destruction of Medicare. What kind of counterproposal is that? It takes your breath away, the pain that would be felt if this went through. And you know, Madam President, I can't help remember, and I'm sure you remember too, the attack that Paul Ryan, who was their nominee for vice president, as chairman of their budget committee, the attack he leveled at President Obama for, quote unquote, cutting $700 billion out of Medicare, when in fact what the president did is get savings from people who were cheaters, the providers who were ripping off Medicare, and he put it back into Medicare and extended the life of the program by 8 years. These same people that ran ads against Democrats, maybe they did it to you, I don't know, all across the country. Democrats voted to cut Medicare. These same people who were crying these bitter tears are now suggesting destroying Medicare as we know it. I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. Who do you fight for? That's the basic question. Why are you here? Who do you fight for? Do you fight for the middle class? I believe we do on our side of the aisle. I believe President Obama does. And I believe if you look at the tax package that came over from Speaker Boehner and all of the cuts to Medicare, by the way, and Madam President, you were a leader in protecting children. There are cuts to child nutrition in there, major cuts. So you have to say, why do you have to cut food to poor kids? Why do you have to kick people out of Medicare? And their answer is, if they were honest, to protect the billionaires and the millionaires. Because that's what it's about. We know it. It's a fact in evidence. I gotta say, we owe more to the American people. We need to find a way back to the fiscal responsibility and the economic growth that we had when Bill Clinton was president. I served with 5 presidents already. It's amazing, in my time in the Congress. And I've seen people come together at crisis moments when Social Security needed to be strengthened, when Medicare needed to be strengthened, when we had deficits as far as the eye can see and we had to resolve it. I've seen all that happen. And I will say, we've got 27 days left to see something good happen on this fiscal cliff. You know, when people tell you, oh, it's very complicated, don't believe it. Don't believe it. It's not complicated. There are several parts to this fiscal cliff. The biggest one is that the Bush-era tax cuts are expiring on 100% of the people. And if they expire, it means people will have to pay more in taxes at a time when we don't want them to have to struggle. We want them to have disposable income because it's good for their families and it's good for the economy, it's good for business, it's good for economic growth. The Bush-era tax cuts are expiring on December 31st. Why don't we find the common ground, get rid of that issue, get those tax cuts to the 98% of the middle class who need them, and fight about the millionaires and the billionaires later. They are okay. They are just fine. And if we were to do that, that simple step, and that means passing our bill that we passed on July 25th. We did it. It's done. We don't have to worry about it. We did our job over here. We got the votes. Pick it up and pass it over there. Now, I understand that Democratic leader Pelosi has done something very interesting. She has taken this bill, same exact bill, and put it at the desk at the House and started what they call a discharge petition. What that means is, since the Speaker Boehner won't bring this bill up, if 218 people sign the discharge petition, then there will be an immediate vote on the floor. So I want to urge Republicans and Democrats and independents over there to sign the discharge petition, to have a vote on this. We have a few days left till the end of the year, 27, and get this done. Then we can talk about the automatic spending cuts. There are ways to stop those. People are upset about those. Personally, I think we have to make spending cuts, but I think that we can soften the blow of those spending cuts by bringing home the money from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and bringing them home to this country, softening the blow of those cuts and making some more investments in infrastructure, which we desperately need after Hurricane, or we call it Superstorm Sandy, that hit New York, that hit New Jersey, that hit Connecticut, that hit Delaware, that hit Maryland. We now see that our infrastructure has to be what we call hardened, made stronger. We can do that if we invest in our people. So, Madam President, The President has offered a very clear plan that takes us off the fiscal cliff, that is fair. We have 27 days to do the right thing. The Senate already passed the tax cuts for 98% of the people. All we're asking is for the House to do that, match us. Then we can get back to the table and figure out a way to soften the blow of the automatic spending cuts. We can look at tax reform. And I want to just say this about tax reform. When our colleagues complain about tax rates and say, well, we would rather close loopholes, watch out. In order to raise the kind of funds we need to raise to lower this deficit, you're looking at the two biggest quote-unquote deductions. One is for your mortgage and one is for charitable. And I would ask rhetorically, what billionaire do you know who has a mortgage? I don't frankly know any. They own their own homes. They don't need a mortgage. They're not hurt by that. Who gets hurt? The middle class. So let's do the right thing. We have passed the right thing on July 25th, 2012. We have 27 days left before taxes on the middle class go up. I know we have the wherewithal to do that. Thank you so much, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I rise this morning just before the noon hour to talk about where we are with regard to the end of the year, and especially where we are with regard to the focus that we should bring to bear on middle-income families. We've had a lot of discussion in the last couple of weeks about terms like the fiscal cliff and terms like that involve tax policy, and all of that is important to debate. But sometimes what's lost in the midst of all that is what's happening to middle-income families. For a lot of them, and the sense that I have talking to folks in Pennsylvania is that they've been asking people like me to do at least two things. Number one is to try to work together to get agreements, not just in the near term, but over a long period of time. And number two, and not in second place, they're as fervent about this as they are about number one. And they say to me all the time, do something to create jobs at a faster pace. Put in place strategies that will lead to job creation that's more accelerated. Now, the good news is we've had some progress. If you look at the numbers for August, September, and October, it's right around 511,000 jobs created. That's good news, and it's good progress. It's a lot better than we were in the spring. I think if you look at, if memory serves me, April, May, June, that time period, we had only created about 200,000. So this 3-month, more than 500,000 jobs created is progress. But we got a long way to go, and we need to move the job creation pace, or the pace has to be accelerated. We have, in the midst of all that, a good bit of uncertainty. Middle-income families look at Washington, and they don't see enough progress on jobs, frankly. They don't see folks coming together yet, and I think we will. But until they see that, until they have a sense that there is something substantial that's decided that affects their lives, they're going to be very uncertain. I hear this from taxpayers. I also hear a lot about uncertainty from small business owners. And at the same time, we have something we can do about it. Or I should say the House has something they can do about it right now. We passed in the Senate this summer, in July, I guess it was July the 24th, a tax cut for middle-income families, meaning we would continue tax rates for those families. That kind of certainty is badly needed right now. So one of the best things that could happen right now is that the House could vote, and then the President would sign into law legislation that would provide certainty for middle-income families. 98% of American families and some 97% of small businesses. So it's time for the House to act. Secondly, I think we have to take steps to make sure that we're creating jobs at a faster pace, as I mentioned before. I'm introducing legislation today to help middle-income families and to boost hiring. The bill is called the Middle Class, the Middle Class and Small Business Tax Cut Act, which would expand the payroll tax cut from last year for 1 year and give employers a tax credit for hiring. And I'll be talking about that legislation. Now, the payroll tax cut that we put into place last year had a number of benefits. I won't go through all those today, but the Joint Economic Committee, the committee of which I'm the chairman, just put out a report in the last 24 hours. It's a fact sheet that highlights some of the benefits of the payroll tax cut. I wanted to just highlight one or two of those, and I know I only have a few more minutes, but I wanted to highlight a few more. And, Mr. President, just for the record, I would ask consent that the Joint Economic Committee fact sheet on the payroll tax cut dated December the 4th, 2012, that that be made part of the record.
Without objection.
Just a couple of points in here. When you look at the economic impact of what happens in families when they have dollars to spend, payroll tax cut put $1,000 on average in the pockets of most families in America. Families making under $150,000 are responsible for almost 82% of consumer spending. So the reason we're creating jobs with the payroll tax cut or a tax credit, the idea that I mentioned before, is because you're giving consumers, families, and small businesses the opportunity to create jobs because of economic activity. I didn't mention the job impact of the payroll tax cut. Created or saved 400,000 jobs in the last year, and didn't in any way harm the Social Security Trust Fund. In fact, it enhanced our ability to have more payroll revenue over time because of that job creation. So I think we should do both, continue the payroll tax cut as well as have a tax credit for businesses so that if they hire in year one versus the year or a year after the year that the credit is in place, that hiring can be given credit and they can be incentivized to hire more. So tomorrow, our Joint Economic Committee will be engaged in a hearing on fiscal cliff issues. We'll discuss strategies to create jobs. We'll discuss the implications of the fiscal cliff and what happens if we don't get some work done by the House to pass the middle-income tax cut that was passed here in a bipartisan fashion. So we have a lot of work to do, Mr. President, but I think one thing we've got to make sure we do is to continue to focus on middle-income families, their lives, their struggles, and what we can do to make sure that they have more dollars in their pocket to continue economic growth. And with that, Mr. President, I will yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President,
Senator from New York.
I note I ask unanimous consent that the quorum be repealed.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. And first I want to thank my great colleague from Pennsylvania. I enjoyed sharing a table last night with him and his beautiful, charming, intelligent wife, who's he's lucky, he would be the first to admit he's lucky to have married, and their 4 great girls. But second, thank him for his excellent, as usual, on-target remarks. We have a great chairman of the JEC, and every time he comes to the floor, it shows. Mr. President, Senator Olympia Snowe, Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard, Congressman Mike Simpson of Idaho, David Brooks, Congresswoman Bono Mack, and Congressman Walter Jones, the National Review, We're here to say that passing the Senate's middle-class tax cut is the right thing to do. But you don't need to take our word for it. Two-thirds of the American public agrees with us, but you don't need to take their word for it either. Just listen to the voices within Speaker Boehner's own party. Here we go. A Kent Conrad I am not, in terms of my facility with charts. It's clear that Speaker Boehner has needed cover from his right flank before he could agree to any deal on taxes with the President. The Speaker didn't have it before, but he sure has it now. When the Wall Street Journal editorial page says that decoupling would not go against conservatives' anti-tax principles, that gives a whole lot of cover to the Speaker. When Grover Norquist refuses to declare whether decoupling would violate his group's pledge, that too gives a whole lot of cover to the Speaker. And when more and more rank-and-file Republicans come out publicly every day in favor of passing the Senate bill, that too gives cover to the Speaker. You really have to salute Congressman Tom Cole. He was the first one on the other side to dare speak the truth about what should be done on taxes, and he's been on TV almost every day making the case to his party in public. The day after Congressman Cole went public, he was dismissed as having a minority opinion. Well, that's not true anymore. His comments sparked a trend. In addition to those Republicans who have spoken out publicly, there are probably dozens of other Tom Coles in the House who just don't feel free to speak their mind, but agree with him privately. Just this morning, in an appearance on cable television, the junior senator from Oklahoma, an unquestioned conservative, came out in favor of higher tax rates on the wealthy. He said, quote, "Personally, I know we have to raise revenue. I really don't care which way we do it. Actually, I would rather see the rates go up than do it the other way, because it gives us greater chance to reform the tax code and broaden the base in the future," unquote. Well, if Senator Coburn does not provide conservative cover, I don't know who does. The House Republican leadership are like generals, hunkered away in a bunker, who don't realize that their army has already laid down its arms. The Republican leaders are in search of an exit strategy. Well, they have one in the form of a discharge petition that's been filed in the House. It's an out for the Speaker. With the discharge petition, the Speaker doesn't have to outright endorse the Senate bill. All he needs to do is tell his members, sign your conscience. If you believe in the discharge petition, sign it, and there'll be no recrimination against you. If they do that, I am confident the discharge petition, if Speaker Boehner does that, I'm confident the discharge petition will get 218 signatures, and then we will get 218 votes on the floor. We may not get a majority of the majority, but we'll definitely get 218 votes. So we may never win over the Paul Ryans in the other chamber, but they aren't necessary. They can vote no, or they can even vote present. I ask unanimous consent. I don't know what the schedule is, that I be given one additional minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Put the bill on the floor. Let rank-and-file Republicans vote their conscience, and this bill can pass. In the New York Times today, it was reported that senior aides on the Republican side are considering just such a strategy to give them a soft landing on this tax debate. Agree to the President's offer on taxes, the thinking goes, and live to fight another day on spending cuts. We agree that a tax hike on middle-class Americans should be taken off the table. Once Republicans agree to higher rates on the wealthy, an agreement on the other sticking points of a grand bargain can quickly fall into place. So, Mr. President, let's stop with the offers and the counteroffers that are leaked only to manufacture headlines in the press. Let's get serious and cross the biggest item of our to-do list off and get this Senate tax cut bill passed. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the next 45 minutes be devoted to a colloquy between myself and my colleagues on this side of the aisle.
Without objection.
I thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, just this last week, the House of Representatives have passed a bipartisan piece of legislation called the STEM Jobs Act. And for those who are unfamiliar with the term STEM, it stands for science, technology, engineering, and math, the hard sciences that we have too few in terms of graduates from our colleges and universities. This bill passed in the House of Representatives with 245 votes and was originally sponsored by my friend and colleague Lamar Smith of Texas, and is very similar to a piece of legislation I myself have introduced earlier this year. The goal of this legislation is one that I think enjoys broad bipartisan support, and that is to help the United States to retain more of the highly skilled immigrants who come to study at our colleges and universities. In particular, this bill would make eligible for a green card those who graduate in the STEM fields who get a master's degree or a Ph.D. And so we would not add to the net number of green cards that would be eligible. There is 55,000 diversity lottery visa green cards that would be substituted for by these STEM green cards. Now, we all know that America's immigration system is broken, and unfortunately, it's a self-inflicted wound in many respects, but in particularly by driving away highly skilled foreign workers who want to start businesses and create jobs right here in America. Now, this is not about hiring foreign workers to perform jobs where we have qualified Americans waiting in line for these jobs. The fact of the matter is we don't produce enough American-born workers to fill the necessary job vacancies in these fields. Many of these potential job creators and entrepreneurs attend our colleges and universities, and you might even say that the American taxpayer helps subsidize their education, because many of them receive world-class training at our public and private colleges and universities and then reluctantly return home to pursue their careers because they can't get a visa or can't get a green card here in America. We are cultivating human capital and then sending those individuals back home. Now, this is an area where there is broad support. My colleague, Senator Moran, recently wrote a letter, had a Dear Colleague letter, which points out that he cites in the letter that more than 3/4 of voters support a STEM-type visa. He quotes in this letter, dated July the 20th, 2012, 87% of Democrats polled, 72% of Republicans polled, and 65% of independents support the creation of a STEM visa. And of course, if you think about it, it's just common sense. Why in the world would we want to subsidize the education of these students from other countries, train them in these highly specialized and highly desirable fields, and then simply send them home? I've introduced legislation over the past years that would increase the number of H-1B visas, which are not green cards. They are actually temporary visas that would allow more of these foreign national students trained in these STEM fields to stay here in the United States and help create jobs here in the United States. This bill actually goes a step further, and what it does is it provides them a green card, which is the first step toward a path to citizenship. If you believe that this is a self-inflicted wound on our economy, you're exactly right, our current policy. We're educating brilliant students and then compelling them to go to work in Shanghai or Singapore rather than San Antonio or the Silicon Valley. Meanwhile, we're handing out tens of thousands of diversity visas to immigrants chosen by a random lottery without regard to any qualifications they might have when it comes to job creation and entrepreneurship. It makes absolutely no sense. I believe we need an immigration policy that serves our national interest. And if there's one thing that we need more than anything else now is we need job creators and entrepreneurs in the United States. And we know in the global economy, it's people with the special skills in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are the ones that are going to help us create jobs and grow the economy, not just for these individuals, but for the people that are hired by the startup businesses that they will create. The STEM Jobs Act would mitigate the problem with the diversity lottery visa, which again does not distinguish between immigrants based on the qualifications they have or their ability to create jobs or be entrepreneurs. It would mitigate this problem by making our immigration system more economically sensible. It would establish new visa categories for 55,000 STEM graduates of American research institutions and would eliminate the random diversity lottery visa to offset these new green cards. Our competitors abroad are observing this brain drain that America is experiencing, and they're taking advantage of it. And in a global economy, they're more than happy to take the best and the brightest foreign students who come and train in the United States and to encourage them to come to their countries and to create jobs and economic activity there. This relatively minor change to our immigration system could deliver a major boost to U.S. economic growth. I realize that many of our colleagues have different priorities when it comes to fixing our broken immigration system, but the reforms contained in the STEM Jobs Act enjoy bipartisan support. So I would urge my colleagues, let's show the world that we can agree on this common sense bipartisan immigration reform. Let's do something for our economy, and let's take this first step in solving our broken immigration system. Now let me say, before I turn the floor over to my colleague from Kentucky, who I know has some comments on this topic, let me address two issues quickly. And that is, I can anticipate hearing from some of our colleagues, this doesn't solve all of what's broken in our immigration system, and I concede that that's correct. But what we need more than anything is to develop some confidence-building measures for the American people to demonstrate that we can come together, Republicans and Democrats alike, and do what needs to be done, which almost everybody agrees is common sense, and then we can follow on with other solutions on a targeted basis to our broken immigration system. I once believed, back in 2005, when Senator John Kyle and I from Arizona introduced something we called the Comprehensive Border Security and Immigration Reform Act of 2005. I believed we should address this issue comprehensively. We tried in 2007, and that bill failed on the Senate floor when Senator Reid pulled the bill from the floor. I believe that now, given the temper of the times and given the skepticism with which the American people view us here in Congress, that the only way we're going to be able to crack this nut is to start small in targeted reforms like the STEM Jobs Act. And so I believe this is the beginning and not the end of fixing what is broken about our immigration reform system. But if we can't do this, I have next to no confidence we can do the rest that needs to be done as well. Final point. I believe that we should be family-friendly when it comes to our immigration system. And this STEM Jobs Act takes a very important step in making sure families can be unified. Under the current law, someone who has a green card is not entitled to bring their immediate family into the United States to live with them while they're waiting for their eligibility for a green card. The STEM's Job Act, though, addresses that by recreating the V visa, which would help us retain more of the potential job creators, but it would also help unify the immediate families of U.S. permanent residents. Right now, the spouses and children of U.S. permanent residents waiting in line outside the United States have to wait outside to wait in line for their green card, which causes families to be separated, something that none of us believe is an optimal situation. The STEM Jobs Act would let them wait inside the United States, unified with their loved ones, until they're off the waiting list, which takes several years, and thus would promote family unification, and that's yet another reason why this bill deserves our support. Mr. President, I would yield to my distinguished colleague from Kentucky, who I know supports this approach, for any comments he would care to make.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
I'd like to compliment the senator from Texas on being a leader in immigration reform. There are many of us in the Republican Party who wish to have immigration reform. I do wish it to be noted for the record, though, today that we could take a small step forward towards immigration reform today. This bill that would allow PhDs and master's successful graduates to come into the country and get a green card could be passed today. This bill is at the desk, and we will ask consent from the majority party today to pass this bill. I will also note that the President and the members of the majority party will object. The President has said he will not pass this unless he can get everything he wants. Well, when I go home or when I talk to folks with the media, they say, why can't you guys get along? Why can't you do anything in Washington? Why is this system so horribly broken? This is precisely why. We agree on this bill. I think the other side will stand up and say they like the concept, but they don't want to do it yet. They want to wait till we agree on everything. Well, guess what? We're never going to agree on everything. So we're never going to get immigration reform if we can't start agreeing to some things and moving the ball forward. This is the same on tax reform. This is the same on entitlement reform. We lurch from deadline to deadline. There will be a deadline, the so-called fiscal cliff coming up, and the President has announced that we don't have enough time to do entitlement reform. We don't have enough time to do tax reform. We don't have enough time to do immigration reform. Well, when are we going to start? When is there going to be a committee hearing designated towards entitlement reform? I've been here 2 years. There's no such committee. When will be there a committee meeting and hearings on immigration reform? There won't be time. Deadlines will pass. But why not break things up into smaller pieces? Why have to have some enormous fiscal cliff or whatever that everybody has to agree to 1,000 moving parts? We are of different persuasions, of different parties, of different beliefs. We're never going to agree on 1,000 things. Why don't we start passing some things we can agree to? This is a small step forward. We can pass this bill today. Do you have an explanation that you can help me to understand why we have to have empty partisanship, why we can't move forward to pass some small things for immigration reform?
Mr. President, I would say in response to the senator from Kentucky that I have been in the Senate for some time now, and I have been engaged in the immigration debates for a long time, and I think one of the biggest challenges is we've tried to deal with this in a comprehensive way that has so many moving parts that it's almost impossible to find a majority in the Senate, much less the House, in order to support all the various components of it. That's one of the things I like about this bill, is that it's narrow, it deals with a consensus reform, common sense reform, and it avoids a lot of the controversy associated with other parts of the immigration subject. But I do believe that we owe it to the American people not to stop here, but it's a good place to start. And once we pass this legislation, I think, and people see that we've acted responsibly and in America's best interest, then they will we can regain their confidence that we can deal with other broken parts of the immigration system. I think
an important point to make about this is that we truly have sometimes philosophic differences with the other side. But what people at home ask me is, when you agree with the other side, when the other side says, we want this part of immigration reform, why can't we do it? That to me, I see as empty partisanship. Are we afraid to give the Republicans credit for introducing immigration reform in the House, the Republican-controlled House? Are we afraid that it might be perceived as a Republican idea? That, to me, is empty partisanship. I routinely vote with the other side on issues that some in my party object to because I believe in the issue. This is an issue where we all should be able to agree to on immigration reform, and yet the other side will object to moving the ball forward on immigration reform. That I don't understand, and that I see as empty partisanship, and that is the dysfunction of this body. When we agree on something, we still can't pass it.
Mr. President, for a question.
Mr. President, I'd ask
Does the senator yield?
I'd ask the senator to withhold for a moment. I know that because I do have a unanimous consent request that I understand the senator likely will have an objection to, and we have other senators who are going to speak. And given the limitation on our time, what I would like to do, Mr. President, is ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 559, H.R. 6429, that the bill be read a third time and passed, the motion to reconsider be made and laid on the table, and that any statements relating to the bill appear at this point in the record.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, and I will object. I'm just going to explain my objection. Very simply, Mr. President, I heard my colleague from Kentucky. He said if we agree on something, let's pass it. We do agree on increasing STEM visas. I am offering a proposal that just does that and does it in a more fulsome way than the proposal of my friend from Texas. But what we don't do is take away other visas or add in other extraneous positions. So I would say the logic of my friend from Kentucky is impeccable. But because of constraints on the other side, they could not pass a plain bill that just added STEM visas. They had to take away other visas that my colleague from Texas doesn't like, but many people do. They had to add in a few other provisions. So I would simply say that if my colleague from Kentucky says we should join together on something we agree with, I'll bet he agrees with our proposal as well. And I'll bet he agrees with it even more than the other proposal because we add two things that are not in the senator from Texas's bill. Number one, we allow unused STEM visas to be used to reduce the backlog of employment green cards. There are 200,000 people waiting. It may well be that the 55,000 visas in the senator from Texas's bill aren't going to be used up. That's what experts say. And second, we allow STEM green cards to be used by entrepreneurs, a bill that has been introduced by, I believe, Senator Coons, Senator Moran, bipartisan, Senator Warner as well. So I'm going to object to this bill not because it increases STEM visas and not for some larger purpose, although I do understand that if we pick off all the pieces that each of us wants, we're not going to get comprehensive reform, and that is why the Hispanic caucus opposes the senator from Texas's bill but supports our bill. I understand that, but if you just want to do STEM and do it in the best way possible without other provisions, because that's what we agree on, I would urge my friend from Kentucky and perhaps others on the other side to support our bill. So I will object to the Cornyn bill, and then I will be offering a bill on the same subject that is purer, cleaner, and more full on STEM visas than the proposal made by my good friend from Texas.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard. Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I understand the senator from New York has objected, and of course, here we go again, making the perfect the enemy of the good, and not moving forward on common sense immigration reform in an area where there is a consensus. The problem, there's several problems with the senator's proposal. One is it hadn't passed the House. This one has. It has a 2-year sunset provision, as I understand. There's no family unification provision, and it doesn't eliminate the diversity lottery visa, which allows people to get green cards without regard to the qualifications that they bring to this country to create jobs and to start new businesses. I know we have the distinguished senator from Minnesota here.
Mr. President, might I be recognized to offer my proposal? I had let my friend from Texas respond, but I have the...
Will the senator from Texas yield?
Mr. President, I would just ask that we have 4 senators here that are prepared to speak, and I just want to make sure we have an adequate time to speak. So any time that's been used by the distinguished senator from New York, that be not added to our time or subtracted from our time, that we retain the total of 45 minutes.
Without objection.
Under those circumstances, I'd yield.
I appreciate the courtesy of my friend and ranking member on the Immigration Subcommittee from Texas.
Senator from New York.
I will now ask unanimous consent that the Judiciary Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-3553, the Brains Act, and the Senate proceed to its consideration, that the bill be read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. And I would just add, and I'll be brief because I don't want to take from my colleagues' time again, what this bill does is provide more STEM visas than the previous bill. It provides an entrepreneurship visa, which the other bill doesn't, and it does not take away existing visas, which the senator from Texas doesn't like, but many other people find popular, good, and necessary. The unemployment rate of those on the diversity visas coming in is much lower than that of the national average. And so if we want to pass a pure STEM bill without extraneous provisions added by people who are anti-immigration because they don't want to see any net increase in immigration, I urge the support of our bill and I move the bill.
Is there objection? Senator from Texas.
Reserving the right to object. The problem with the senator's proposal is that this piece of legislation he's referred to has not passed out of committee in the Senate. It has not passed the House. This bill, the STEM Act, has passed the House. It has a 2-year sunset provision. This is permanent legislation. It has no family unification provision that will allow the family members, the immediate family members of the green card holder, to wait the time when they will become eligible for a green card here in the United States as opposed to back in their country of origin. And it does nothing to promote merit-based immigration reform. We ought to be looking at immigration reform from the standpoint not just how does it help the immigrant, but how does it help America create jobs and entrepreneurship, and for that reason, I would object. Mr. President, at this time, I would yield the floor to the distinguished senator from... I did object. I object.
Objection is heard, by the way.
At this time, I would yield the distinguished senator from North Dakota, and then following that, the distinguished senator from Iowa for any comments they care to make.
I'd like to thank the esteemed senator from Texas, as well as senator from Kentucky, and I see that our colleague, the senator from Iowa, has joined us as well. I rise to speak in support of the STEM Act, but also to respond to the senator from New York. I see that the senator has left, but I do want to respond to some of the points that he made as well in support of the senator from Texas. The STEM Act passed the House. It was House Resolution 6429, sponsored by Congressman Lamar Smith. And I would argue that it accomplishes both of the things that we're talking about today. It both provides us with the opportunity to have a greater pool of employees with training in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, something that we very much need in this country, and it also accomplishes the diversity that was referred to by the senator from New York. So what we're proposing, what the senator from Texas and Kentucky and Iowa and myself are proposing, is to accomplish both goals. We're saying, look, we can have these students who have graduated with degrees, either a doctorate degree or a master's degree in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, things we very much need to get help get our economy going and growing. Growing economy creates more employment, also creates the revenue without raising taxes that we need to address our deficit and debt. So this legislation both accomplishes that goal and still provides an increase in diversity, which is what the senator from New York was talking about. And then the additional point is the point that the senator from Texas so very clearly made. This legislation passed the House. Last time I checked, legislation has to pass the Senate and the House. That's a pretty important distinction. Going back to the comments of the senator from Kentucky, he said, hey, if we can't do it all at once because of disagreements, let's start getting done what we can get done. So here's a bill that provides us with people who can help our economy grow, people in the sciences and technology fields that we very much need. It will increase diversity, just as the senator from New York said, and it's passed the House. Common sense says, let's go. Let's pass the bill. So we very much want to join with the senator from New York and the senator from Delaware and the other sponsors that he referred to, but let's join on something that can actually get done, meaning a bill that passes the House as well as the Senate. I think that logic is compelling. I look at my own state of North Dakota. We're doing amazing things in energy. Matter of fact, we're hot on the trail of the state of Texas when it comes to oil development. We're after you, I'm telling you. But you know what it's going to take? It's going to take continued development of the technologies that not only help us produce more energy, but help us do it with good environmental stewardship. And what we're talking about is making sure that when we have the engineers and the scientists and the technicians and the mathematicians that graduate from our great universities with doctorate and master's degrees, they can stay here and help us do it here rather than have it done somewhere else in some other country that then gets ahead of the United States. And I still go back to this will help us solve the fundamental challenges we face today, which is getting this economy growing so we get people back to work and creating the revenue the right way with economic growth to help us address our deficit and our debt. With that, I yield back to the esteemed senator from Texas.
Mr. President, can I ask how much time remains in our